Chapter 6. Rue watched from the long shadows of a setting sun, wet and shivering from his dive. He hid in an old boatyard and peered through the broken hull of an abandoned ship. Kriska slinked around in the shadows, making soothing, cooing sounds. One was close enough to touch as it stood on its hind legs, looking out through a crack in the wall. You could pat them sometimes, but more often than not, they would give you a warning nip. Rue ignored the creature. Vince's gang still roamed the docks, trying to find where he could have surfaced. Some stood on the furthest pier, pointing out at the anchored boats. Others disappeared back into the streets of yore to keep a watch on the inroads. Rue checked his neck pouch and felt the weight of the gold coin. His silver and coppers were safe in his backpack. It wouldn't be long before the gang searched the boatyard. Rue sighed as he slipped away. He would have to go through the oldest part of town. He felt a chill as he crossed into a neglected street. Here the damage after the fall was so great it had been abandoned. Not even the Kriska came here. A strange sickness still lingered in the air that withered the skin and stole the breath. Only the poorest of the poor lived here, and they did not live long. Rue knew not to stay in this cursed place. The sickness would rot the lungs after a few days, and it would take weeks to recover from. Still, it lay between him and his hidden home. It was also the only place Vince's gang would not go. Rue moved silently through the collapsed cobbled streets. The fog grew thicker here. Everything was damp. The stone path slick with stale water. Old awnings collapsed and rotting. Night was fast approaching, and he shivered as the shadows darkened. It was unnaturally quiet in this part of town. Most living things avoided it, a natural instinct at the wrongness of the place. Even the noise from the distant docks seemed reluctant to enter. An occasional hacking cough from some poor soul would echo off the broken buildings, all damaged and torn. Some structures were burned so badly that the stonework had melted. Magic was a distant memory to the people of yore, banished long before Rue was born. As he stole through these cursed streets, he could see why. A primal fear shivered deep in his belly, a fear at the damage magic could do, and the taint it could leave behind. You could still feel it here, crackling softly across the skin, pulling at the hairs on his arms. It was little wonder that it was banished, if it could do this to half a city. He continued, crossing rubble and ruin, careful not to slip. The only sound was his muffled footsteps, light as they were. Night had settled in. His only guide through the misty darkness was a blurred half-moon. Often his world was plunged into heavy shadow as old towers, still standing defiantly, loomed over him. Finally, the dull moonlight faded behind creeping clouds, and Rue found himself in the blackest night, where he had to hold his hands out in front of him, feeling his way forward. As he rounded a corner, the boy was surprised to see a flickering light spilling across the street. It glowed from a window, pulsing in hues of blues, reds and greens. Rue paused. He would either have to backtrack or hurry through this spilled light. He was cold and tired and just wanted to get home. Rue shivered as he edged forward. The window was large and attached to an old tavern. Its sign still hung loosely overhead, although its words had long faded. Rue peeked inside, knowing that although he could see into the lit room, nobody would see out into the darkness. The tavern was almost empty, long abandoned. Its room-length bar had collapsed upon itself, and shattered bottles lay all around it. A back door hung off its hinges, showing stone stairs leading down to a basement. Dusty tables made of rough wood scattered the room, some overturned, others broken down, their legs splayed. One table, the most intact of them, had been wiped down and set in the middle of the room. A large lantern hung off a chain over it. On either side of the table sat two figures, unusual figures, the kind of folk people would look at twice, even in a crowded room, let alone in the middle of an abandoned part of town. But Rue barely glanced at them. His attention was drawn to the balls of light that flowed between them, unnatural wisps of colour that circled around them like fireflies. Was this magic? A deep chill ran through Rue. What else could it be? He backed away from the window, his heart hammering in his chest. He should run. This was too much. Magic? He was exhausted and cold. He just wanted to be home. He found himself up against a wall on the opposite side of the street, crouching in the shadows. The window still glowed, casting its flickering cutted lights across the cobblestones. He looked down the street. Rue cursed like a sailor. Could this day get any worse? All he wanted to do was run in the sun and then sleep peacefully in his safe, forgotten tower. But no, instead he was soaking wet and stuck in a cursed street with bleeding magic poking out of one of its windows. Oh, and he was probably carrying an illegal magical coin that half the criminals in Yor were now looking for. But that window beckoned. The colours pulled at him. He needed to see more. Rue shook his head. Might as well push his luck all the way. Moving silently, Rue approached at a half crouch until he was under the windowsill. He was shaking uncontrollably, whether from his damp clothes in the night air or from fear, he wasn't sure. He took a deep, steadying breath and then peeked once again into the room of swirling lights. The end of chapter 6. And hey, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that, please leave me a generous tip of 1 like, and may the Chris King watch over you. Also, if you want to be notified of the next chapter, subscribe and click that notification button, and it'll be coming out soon. Thanks again, and I'll catch you all later.